This is the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Welcome back to the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm Michael Riscica, and today I'm joined by architect Emily Hobbs. What's up, Emily?
Hi, how are you?
Really good. Thanks for being here today. Today, we're going to be talking about something really important, and that's how to get the most out of ARE Bootcamp. How we got here with this topic was I actually said to Emily, I said, hey, what do you want to talk about on the podcast? And you immediately jumped at this idea about getting the most out of boot camp. How did that come to be, Emily?
Well, I love boot camp. I love talking about boot camp. I took boot camp myself, and I actually meet with boot campers now at the halfway point through boot camp, the 10-week program. So I just thought this is something definitely I can say a lot about. So why not do a podcast on it?
Yeah. So Emily and I sat down, we jotted out a bunch of notes about some things that we talked about, how to get the most out of boot camp. And then I'd say this episode was originally planned for the boot campers, and I figured we would just share it inside the program once they signed up to help them maximize their experience. And we're still going to do that, but why not just share with everyone, whether you're considering joining the boot camp or looking for ways to be more effective. This conversation is going to give you an insight into how the boot camp works and how people succeed in it. Before we get started, let me just quickly explain what the hell is the ARE Boot Camp. Think of it like an architecture school design studio, but instead of designing buildings or projects, everyone's studying for their architect exam. Just like design studio, you're surrounded by a group of people all working and marching towards the same goal. There's structure, there's mentorship, there's accountability and community. I always say you're really not studying alone. You're working alongside a group of people who are trying to go after the same thing you are. And so the way the bootcamp works is it basically helps two types of people. People in the beginning of their architect exams, helping them get a really strong start and make progress very quickly, or helping them finish their architect exams and pushing them across the finish line. The way it works is it's 10 weeks long. They meet with me. They meet with a coach, either me, Emily, or Lorenzo. And each week we talk about curriculum. What did we study last week? What are we studying this week? How did it go? Any questions? We kind of check in once a week for an hour. But then in between that meeting with us, each person studying alone, working alongside other boot campers, sometimes studying in groups, one-on-one with other people, and marching towards that goal. I'd say accountability is a big part of it. Boot camp helps people, stay on track, build strong study habits. I've been running this program for the past 10 years. This September will be the 10-year anniversary of boot camp. That's pretty much how it works. It's a whole community. I would say I'm the bootcamp ringleader, but there's a whole circus of bootcamp characters that really make up this program. So that's what bootcamp is. And Emily, you want to get us started with your first tip?
Yes, definitely. I've got a lot to say about bootcamp, but we'll start with this. And this is a key tip. By starting and joining bootcamp, you need to learn to advocate for yourself. One of the biggest lessons bootcamp teaches is that passing the ARE is entirely in your hands. Nobody else is going to do the work for you. And the sooner you take that responsibility for yourself and on your own, that is your key to the learning process and your key to success. And that will make your study process better and your career better. So a lot of people think that they'll be handed a secret formula or magic study guide that tells them exactly what they need to memorize, and then boom, suddenly they'll be a licensed architect and know everything they need to know. But that's not how this works. And that's not how learning works. There's this great quote that I really love that is, if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. But if you do what is hard, your life will be easy. And that directly applies to the ARE. Too many people sit back and expect test prep companies to figure it all out for them. I was one of those people a long time ago. I expected someone to just hand me a list with all of this facts and information and that I would memorize it and that magically I would pass the exam. What's missing from a lot of, study guides and test prep material is the ability to actually engage with the material. And not engaging with the material is a very passive approach that doesn't work. And it actually makes the process a lot harder in the long run. Because when you sit for an exam, NCARB isn't just testing you on your ability to memorize something. They're actually testing you on how well you understand and can apply information to the material. And if all you've done is follow someone else's interpretation of the material and fail to see what's actually important in the content, then you're going to struggle through all of the exams. Instead of waiting for someone else to spoon feed you the information and to teach you the information, you need to actively take charge of your learning. And that's what I mean by saying you need to advocate for yourself. Bootcamp is designed to create this mindset. Instead of just absorbing information passively and hoping that you learn it, you're actually trained to approach the exam like a problem solver. The first shift is understanding that NCARB's objectives are the foundation to your studying. If you don't know exactly what NCARB is testing you on, then you're wasting your precious study time. Bootcamp helps you to get very clear about exam objectives for each test and understand how NCARB thinks about the material so that you can anticipate what they are going to ask you a question on. Once you understand what NCARB is actually looking for, you stop wasting time on all the fluff and start focusing on what really matters. Mike, I hear you say this to boot campers a lot, and I really love it. If you are not studying NCARB's objectives, then you are not studying for the architect's exam. Bootcamp is it's not about following some, again, secret ingredient or some ARE guru's interpretation of the information. It is what NCARB is testing you on. So because NCARB has created these objectives and this outline, you should study that as you study for the exam. It's about building the skills to understand and interpret the information for yourself. And that actually makes the process a lot easier in the long run. And as a result, it makes you a better architect as well.
It's true. If you're not studying NCARB's objectives, you're not studying for the architect exam. The best way to study for the architect exam is to reverse engineer it. When NCARB writes these questions for the test, what happens is all the old guys get together and they say, all right, let's write a question for PJM objective, 2.1. And they read what it says and say, what can we write a question about? And they read it over and over again and say, maybe we should write a question about, I don't know, this topic. And your ability to understand those objectives and to use that information as you're marching towards the study material is gold, man. That information's more valuable than anything else. NCARB's not testing you on, the AHPP or the black spectacles or the Amber book or any of this stuff. They're testing you on those objectives. Yeah, it drives me nuts that people don't use them as much as they should. That's the approach Young Architect has always championed, is teaching you how to teach this to yourself.
Right, and your own personal interpretation and understanding of the original source, right? So the objectives being an original source of what you'll see on the exam, straight from the writers, right? And you reading it in your own voice and in your own words rather than through someone else's interpretation.
And it's a little off topic, but I'm going to say it too. When it comes to the pro practice exams, those exams are written straight out of the Architect's Handbook Professional Practice. And it doesn't make sense not to use that book. It drives me crazy that anyone would say to anyone studying for the architect exam, oh, you don't need the Architect's Handbook Professional Practice. Like, I've already figured it out for you. That's insane. It's all there. Like, why wouldn't you use that study material? That's more valuable than anything you could buy. So.
Right. Don't read a study guide version of the AHPP. Read the AHPP, the original source, and that will help you really learn and for the information to actually stick and for you to fully understand it and not just memorize it.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey there, this is Michael, and I have a quick favor to ask. If you're finding value in this free ARE podcast, please take a second to follow, like, subscribe, and leave a review or a comment on whatever platform you happen to hear this podcast. Your engagement lets us know that people are actually listening, and it inspires us to keep creating more podcast episodes. But honestly, what matters most to me isn't the likes or the follows. It's sharing this podcast with others who need it. When I was studying for my exams years ago, I felt completely alone and everyone was hoarding information instead of helping each other out. And it was that frustration that led me to start Young Architect back in 2014 with a simple mission: help the next generation of architects become the most successful generation of architects. So please share this podcast with your colleagues, friends, or anyone tackling their AREs. By sharing knowledge, we all rise together. All right, back to the podcast. All right, so my first tip about bootcamp is to just follow the program. Just follow the program. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with studying for the architect exam is they don't have a clear plan. They spend way too much time trying to figure out what to study, comparing study materials, jumping between different resources, second guessing themselves, when what they really need to do is to just sit down and studying. Trying to understand what you should be studying is not actually studying or learning. And that's why boot camp takes the guesswork out of all that stuff. Instead of wasting energy on understanding what's good, what's bad, what's next, the curriculum has been figured out, and you don't have to curate the plan for yourself. You can just execute on that plan. And boot campers immediately start studying rather than spending a lot of time trying to figure out what they should study. And this isn't some random study plan. It's a system that's been refined since 2015. I always use this at Groundhog's Day analogy of, that movie Groundhog's Day where he keeps reliving the same day over and over and over again. That's my life in the 10-week ARE Bootcamp curriculum. And here we are 10 years later, and I figured out how to sequence and how to order and what's too much to give you every week and what's just enough. And it's been shaped by the experience of thousands of boot campers. So I'd say in boot camp, every week builds on the last. And by the time you get to the harder material, you already have a really strong foundation in place to really make things move a lot easier. So just as an example, we don't start reading contracts on day one. Instead, I've got like 20 to 30 little exercises that we do to train you how to think critically, how to understand different elements of the contract, outside of the contract. And by the time we work our way to finally sit down and read those damn contracts, my boot campers already know 60% of what it says. And it's like, oh, I already knew this, and it makes it such a better experience studying something that you've already learned. But Emily, the challenge that a lot of people struggle with in boot camp is just following the plan. They feel like they got to do more. They got to get ahead. They got to look up every single little thing that they didn't understand on week 1 or 2 and feel like they got to master it all as they march forward. And you know what happens is they actually just burn themselves out. They get stuck.
Distracted.
Yeah, they get stuck in this analysis paralysis and they end up exhausted or anxious without actually overthinking it too much. And so I always just like to remind people it's going to be really sloppy at the very beginning of boot camp, and that's okay. And then because they weren't following the plan, they start to fall behind on the stuff that's actually important. And so I always say, just follow the program. If it's not on the list of stuff that we're going to do every week, hey, good news. You don't have to do it, And boot camp's built to give you exactly what you need when you need it. So it's like, I always say, like, guys, at week 1, I have thousands of practice questions and videos and resources and everything. And you know what? You don't need it all this week. So let me just break it down into small bite-sized pieces. I would say it's like 10,000 little baby steps and to pass all these exams. And then this week, I'm just going to give you like 300 little baby steps to focus on so it feels a lot more manageable. And if it's not on the list, don't do it. A lot of prep companies, want to sell you more content. And bootcamp's different. It's about helping people create a sustainable system that actually works. That's my goal. And if you're doing bootcamp, commit to it. Stop taking advice from people who are not a part of the bootcamp program. It drives me crazy when people spend all this money and they wait all this time. And finally we get into bootcamp. They're like, why are we doing it this way? So-and-so says you should study for all 6 exams all at the same time. No. In bootcamp, we're going to break it down into smaller pieces and be really, really strategic with how we do it. The other day, I was telling Emily that I was talking to someone who was thinking about signing up for boot camp, and they said, "Yeah, Mike, I'm comparing boot camp to all the other ARE prep programs out there." And I said to them, listen, boot camp is the only ARE prep program out there. Everything else is just study materials. All the other products give you tons and tons of information, but it's your job to figure out how to use it all. Whereas the boot camp is going to talk with you and make sure you're actually learning it and guide you through the process and break it into small, more manageable pieces. It's not just about what to study. It's about how to study, how to manage your time, and how to stay accountable. And that's exactly why bootcamp's a program. And the fact it's structured as a program makes your life so much easier. Just follow the program, trust the process, stick to the plan. And if you do, it's just going to propel you to the finish line a little bit faster.
Yeah. And to echo that, Mike, I think that trusting that plan, trusting the timing of the syllabus and the sequence is huge. I know when I took boot camp that I was wanting to kind of, just go hard and start studying full speed. But I really appreciated the weekly syllabus. I was given a weekly to-do list instead of coming up with one on my own. And it builds on itself. Mm-hmm. So if you're studying for some things weeks 1, 2, and 3, and you're kind of like, well, when are we going to get to this? Trust the process. It's coming. Mike has a plan for you. We have a plan for you. I meet with boot campers at the halfway point, and there's definitely this feeling of, okay, it kind of felt chaotic in the beginning, but I'm getting into a good work groove. And if you've just joined boot camp, there is the kind of growing pains of the onboarding process, right? You're suddenly given this new direction, and maybe it's different from what you've been doing in the past on your previous, divisions and studying technique. Just kind of leave that in the past. Trust in boot camp, trust in your team, and just take it 1 week at a time. And we check in with each other once a week for that reason. And I, as someone who studied for quite some time on my own until committing to doing this as a team and using, boot camp, it makes such a big difference when you trust that process.
I would say too, it makes it easier. If it's not on the list, you don't have to do it.
Right.
It's like just do your stuff we're doing this week.
Right. And forget about the rest. So another great thing about boot camp is that, there's a lot of resources. So there's no reason to stay stuck on anything while you're in boot camp. If something doesn't make sense, there are so many ways to get an answer, and that's what makes this different from studying alone. So when you're studying on your own, you may hit a roadblock, and then what happens? You spend hours trying to figure it out. Maybe you'll Google something, go down the rabbit hole of information, or worse, you'll move on without ever fully understanding it, and you just, hope that question, that content doesn't come up on your exam. That won't happen in boot camp because the answers are always right there. You just have to ask for it. And the easiest way to ask for it is during a meetup. You're surrounded by people during a meetup that are in boot camp that are studying the same material that you are. So chances are that someone else has the exact same question that you have or has struggled through the same information that you have, and they may have already figured it out and can explain it to you in real time. If you need help during boot camp and, if you need help outside of a meetup, you have everyone's contact information from boot camp. We set you up with everyone else who is in the program, their phone number, their email. You can call and chat with them. You're set up with a team that you can connect with. You're all following the same syllabus and curriculum. And we're all in this program together. So why not reach out to your team and get the clarity you need fast? And of course, Mike makes himself ridiculously accessible during boot camp. He literally begs people not to email him because he hates email. And instead, he gives you his personal cell phone number so that there's no back and forth waiting for days for a reply. Instead, you can just send Mike a quick text or give him a call, and you can have any issue that you have resolved, or he'll give you a direction.
Call me in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah. Call him at, 2 a.m. Most likely he's coming up with more content for the boot camp syllabus. But, we try to make ourselves as accessible as possible to everyone because we know your time is precious, and we're happy that you're here and making this investment in yourself. So you even have access to myself and Lorenzo. We also do check-ins with, boot campers throughout the process. So if there's ever a time where something's just not clicking, you can email us and we will help you figure it out. And then there's also another really cool resource that we have that we've just added is the virtual AI tutors. We recently introduced them, and honestly, they've been doing an incredible job answering content questions. It's just another way to get instant answers fast so that you're never left sitting around wondering if you've interpreted something correctly or not. The point is, when you're in boot camp, you are not in this alone. Boot camp is designed to remove the frustration of being stuck. So unlike most ARE test prep companies, there's no mystery about who's behind the program. It's us. We're right here. There isn't some Wizard of Oz situation where you never see the people who are running the show behind the curtain. And bootcamp is an ongoing conversation. We're always curating and improving and adding other avenues of information. And we want you to be a part of that conversation. And that's what makes this program work. Instead of wasting hours searching for answers by yourself, you can ask, you can get clarity, and you could move on with the rest of your studying so that you don't lose that momentum, you don't stay stuck in that frustrated mystery feeling, and you just keep making progress on your studying.
That used to happen to me a lot. Was I would get stuck on something and I'd have nowhere to go. Or I would put up a post on some weird forum and hope that someone knows what I'm talking about or can make sense of it. Whereas in boot camp, we're just talking real time. It makes it so much easier where you could talk through stuff that doesn't make sense than trying to email or post on forums or put it into writing,
Right.
Ooh,
That's how you lose momentum really quickly.
yeah, totally. All right, next, I want to share why people who take ARE Bootcamp study harder during the program than they ever have in their entire lives. And the answer is pretty easy. It's the accountability. Studying for the ARE when you're alone makes it way too easy to procrastinate. Emily and I have PhDs in procrastination. And when no one's checking in on you, it's really easy to say, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow turns into next week or next month. And suddenly it's the end of the year and you still haven't made any progress on the architect exam. The bootcamp removes that isolation and you're now a part of a team and people are expecting you to show up. Bootcampers tell me all the time, Mike, I study so much harder because I know you're going to check in with me and ask how it went this week. And it's true. When you know someone's going to check in on you, you take things a lot more seriously. Think back to architecture school. Would you have worked as hard as you did if you didn't have a group of people literally working alongside you? Would you have pushed yourself the same way if you were, doing this by yourself and you didn't have people pulling all-nighters, people to talk to about your projects or your drawings or your models or your design in between class sessions, critiquing each other's work? I'm the most guilty of not doing a damn thing if there's no accountability at all. Emily did a presentation once all about procrastination.
Yes,
and
I did.
it's an amazing presentation. But
Straight from my architecture studio experience.
so in the bootcamp, it builds that structure. You're not just studying when you feel like it. You got deadlines, you got a plan, you got people to talk to who are doing the same thing you are, and the accountability comes from a few different places. First is the coaches. It's me, Emily, Lorenzo, knowing that you're going to see one of us every week, checking in, talking about the curriculum, the program that we're following. That's a big part of the accountability. There's also the other people in the bootcamp, the peer accountability, showing up and studying with them and attending their meetups. And then when it's your turn to host the meetups, they're going to be all depending upon you to do the work, do the research, find some good content, put together a presentation about the stuff that we're studying and to host a great meetup. There's also the test date accountability. I think this is, I always say it's like the secret fire that under people's butts that makes them work harder. In bootcamp, we don't schedule exams on week one. I say we got a lot of work to do that needs to get done. Let's start doing the work. Let's start making some progress and let's start gathering some data. And then we choose a test date in the middle of bootcamp. But once we get that test date, man, it gets real. This thing really gets real. And that really helps propel people a lot harder, knowing that they have a date to get this stuff done by. And I'd say that probably the last layer of accountability is the financial investment. I've said it before. If the bootcamp was $20, everyone would sign up and no one would take it seriously and it would be a huge disaster. But it's not. It's an expensive program. And the people who have made the investment into themselves with becoming a registered architect and taking the boot camp, they take this really seriously. I always say you will never find another study group as serious as the ARE boot camp because every single person there has made a huge investment to be there and they're going to get their money's worth out of it. It kind of like gets back to that quote Emily gave us at the beginning. It was, what was it? It's if you do what's easy, your life will be hard. If you do what's hard, your life will be easy. I can't tell you how many free things I've gotten that I don't take seriously because I didn't work hard for it. Yeah, the boot camp, there's so many different levels of accountability. It really makes a huge difference with helping people just, take this more seriously and really execute to get this thing done a lot faster.
Boot camp is hard. It's a compacted amount of time and you're given an intense schedule, but it's also not forever. It's for 10 weeks. It's 10 weeks of hard so that on exam day, it's easier.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Another thing about boot camp are the meetups. And I highly recommend you lean into the meetups. Meetups are one of the most powerful parts of boot camp. Almost every day after work, boot campers are logging on to Zoom and studying together. And on weekends, there are always at least 2 to 6 meetups scheduled on Saturdays and Sundays. So no matter where you are in the bootcamp program, there's always a chance to join in, ask questions, and talk through some challenging material with people who understand it and can teach it to you and have a conversation about it with you. So everyone in bootcamp hosts at least 2 meetups. And honestly, it's one of the most fun and valuable parts of the program. Studying alone is very tough, and you could read something on your own. You could dedicate a lot of time to getting through the books, getting through the reading material, and it can kind of make sense. But when you try to explain it to someone and try to teach it to someone, you might realize that there's some gaps in the information that you didn't fully understand. So that's where meetups come in. 1 hour in a meetup is way more effective than spending 2 to 3 hours of trying to study and do some reading by yourself. The best way to retain information is by teaching it to someone else. And that sounds a little intimidating, but it's actually very straightforward. When you run a meetup and you're, tasked with hosting a meetup, you're not expected to be an expert on the material. You're just leading a conversation about the content that you've chosen to talk about. The process of organizing a meetup forces you to think about the material differently. And instead of just absorbing information, you have to figure out how to explain it in a way that makes sense. That's when you really start to retain and understand information. So in this way, bootcamp has a lot of parallels to architecture school. When you start, someone else is going to teach you what they've learned, and later on, you're going to be tasked with teaching that to someone else. And that's what's going to help the material stick. So you're not just memorizing information, you're actually learning. You're learning by teaching it to others, and you're teaching it to yourself at the same time. This is what makes bootcamp different from any other study program. Teaching forces you to engage with the content on a deeper level, and the more engaged you are, the more you'll retain and be able to recall on test day. And here's the best part. You don't have to have it all figured out before hosting a meetup. The group works through concepts together, so you're never really on your own. You don't have to have it all figured out. You show up with an idea or a question, and as a group, you get through the content together.
Those are the best meetups, actually, is when someone's stuck on a topic or something and they just bring what they're confused about to the whole group, and everyone collectively comes together and works through making a better understanding of it.
Yeah, it becomes like a conversation. It's not just you're not just memorizing answers, or if you keep taking the same practice exam over and over, you're going to eventually memorize what the correct answer is. But meetups are interactive, and they really are a conversation that you will remember come test day. Oh, I remember Mike was talking about this, and you'll be able to make, the best educated guess towards your answers during the exam.
100%.
So, yeah, I love meetups. They can be a challenge to put together, maybe a little intimidating, but let's do the hard work now. Let's challenge ourselves now so that when we sit for the exam, it feels that much easier. So meetups make studying easier, not harder. They break up the isolation of studying alone, and they give you real-time explanations, and they're going to help build your confidence because you're actively using and talking about the material, not just kind of reading it to yourself and hoping that it sticks. So if you want the most out of bootcamp, you have to show up to the meetups. You have to participate, chime in, speak up. And then when it's your turn, you get to host the meetups. And you'll be surprised at how much they help.
All right, so here's my last tip about getting the most out of bootcamp. It's about setting realistic expectations for yourself. So one of the biggest mistakes people make when they first start studying for the architect exam is they have completely unrealistic expectations about how this process is going to go. They don't know all the things they don't know. And generally speaking, I think our profession does an amazing job at marginalizing the amount of work involved to become a licensed architect. It took me 1,800 hours of studying and taking tests to pass all my exams. This is a long journey. In bootcamp, we track every study hour the same way we track how many hours we worked on projects in the office. And across the board with ARE 5.0, it's taking people between 800 and 14 hours to pass all 6 exams. And that's with a structured study plan, with coaching, with efficient studying. There really is no shortcut. And here's the part that throws a lot of people off. According to NCARB's data, everyone taking the architect exam is failing 3 to 6 exams along the way before they pass them all. And that's completely normal. I failed 4 tests before I passed them all. Emily failed a handful of times, Lorenzo as well. That's the process. Failing isn't a sign that you're not smart or that you're a failure or you're not working hard enough. It just means that you're actually in the fight. And that's why we call it a boot camp, because we're preparing you for the battle. You're going to have to take the hits. There's going to be setbacks. If you don't have the right expectations going in, I'll tell you right now, it's easy to get discouraged. You and I both know a lot of people who are super smart and did a half-assed job of studying for their first architect exam, took that test, failed it, and then gave up on this goal of becoming a registered architect because they had unrealistic expectations about what this process was about. Too many people get into the architect exam thinking, I'm just going to pass every exam the very first try, or I'll be done in 6 months. And when that doesn't happen, they just abandon the idea of becoming an architect. I always say, failing isn't not passing a test. It's giving up on this idea of becoming a registered architect because you did pass a stupid test that you get to retake anyway. But the reality of it is that passing the architect exam, it's not supposed to be easy. It's designed to push you. And that's why boot camp is a coaching program. It's not a one-size-fits-all study plan. We don't just throw a ton of study materials at you with a fire hose and tell you to figure it out. We measure every hour we spend studying. We adjust strategy on a weekly basis. We help you stay on track. But you have to set those expectations for yourself too. You have to commit to the long game. The goal isn't to just pass one test, it's to pass all your exams. And that means staying consistent, adjusting when things don't go as planned, and pushing through those tough moments. If you go into boot camp with the right expectations, you're going to be just fine. You're going to become a registered architect. I will guarantee that you can become a registered architect. But if you expect perfection and try to rush this process or try to shortcut it, you're setting yourself up for frustration.
Yeah, that's true, Mike. I was one of those people. I thought I could just take all of my exams in 6 months and walk away and easy peasy. But no, nothing worth having is easy, right? It's going to be hard work, and just acknowledging that it will be difficult and a challenge from now will just make this whole process through boot camp easier, because you won't be expecting perfection from yourself. And then when perfection inevitably doesn't happen, you won't beat yourself up about it, because all of that will just distract you from the goal. So yeah, I set those realistic expectations, be honest with yourself and your time, and that'll make this whole process a lot easier.
Yeah, 100%.
And my last tip about boot camp and getting the most from this 10-week program is staying connected to boot camp after the 10 weeks are over. So, boot camp continues after the 10-week intense, routine and schedule. There is a long-term support system in place that stays with you until you've passed all your divisions and are licensed. So when those 10 weeks are over, don't worry, you're not on your own. You've built this momentum. You've built study habits, and you've built great connections. And all of that does not disappear once the program officially ends. One of the biggest mistakes people make when studying for the AREs is that they're trying to do this alone. And Bootcamp solves that by surrounding you with a network of people who are in this with you. You've got your team, people who are studying the same material that you're studying. You've got us, you've got Mike and I and Lorenzo. And even after those 10 weeks are up, that network is still there. You will still have access to meetups, to study resources, and to this community. So a lot of boot campers will continue joining study meetups, and they'll keep checking in with their group and their teammates. And they use that support system that they've built over the 10 weeks so that they can keep making progress on other divisions and, all the way until they're licensed. So that and beyond that, bootcamp helps you through the entire exam process. You're not just preparing for one division. You're not just preparing for just one test and then you're out on your own. You're preparing to finish all 6. Mike has already created videos and resources to help bootcampers transition from pro practice into the technical exams. So you don't have to worry about scrambling and figuring out what's next once you're done. There is a plan in place. So trust us, we've got your back. And when you finally finish all the exams, we celebrate you. So when you're finally done, Bootcamp is going to send you a beautiful gold medal in the mail. And it's not just some small moment. This is a huge accomplishment. That medal is a reminder of the hours that you've put in, the setbacks that you overcame, and the follow through that it took for you to get there. And so at the end of the day, Bootcamp isn't just about helping you study for your AREs for 10 weeks. It's about getting you to that finish line and making sure you walk away with your license.
Yeah, I'd even add too, the bootcamp keeps working even after people get their licenses, because I'd say on the regular, I have a phone call with someone who took the bootcamp several years ago. They're licensed now and they're the principal of a firm, and they've got someone that's struggling with their exams and they want to talk, Mike, let me talk to Mike and see what we can do to get you on the right path. A lot of people don't realize this, but Most of the people who sign up for bootcamp are referrals that come in from other people who have taken the program. So yeah, bootcamp just keeps helping long after the 10 weeks is over. All right, so Emily and I wanted to make this episode because we know how important it is to maximize your time at the bootcamp. And we've seen over and over again that when people fully engage with the program, who follow the structure, they lean into the meetings, they take advantage of the accountability, they're the ones who make the most progress and pass their exams faster. Bootcamp works because it teaches you how to advocate for yourself, how to take ownership of your studying instead of relying on someone else to just spoon feed everything to you. It's not about having study materials, it's about following the curriculum, trusting the program, and recognizing that bootcamp really is the only ARE program that actually gives you a system to put all this information into place and organizes it in a logical sequence. And when you're stuck, there's always a way to get an answer. There's always someone hanging out to talk to, whether it's in a meetup, a text, or a phone call, or even our new AI virtual tutors. You never have to study in isolation. And that's what makes accountability so powerful, is when people are expecting you to show up, the work gets done. Meetups and studying with the other boot campers are also a huge part of it. I always say lean into that. It's not just about getting help. It's about reinforcing what you've learned and teaching others. And that's what really makes it stick. Hearing how other people solve problems and their thought processes, even if they're wrong. Knowing why the wrong answers are wrong is just as important as knowing why the right answers are right. And also setting realistic expectations might not sound like the most exciting part, but it's probably one of the most important, is when you go into this process with the right mindset, knowing that it's going to take time, hard work, knowing that you might fail a few exams, and that's just part of the process. That's going to push you through the hard times. There's going to be more frustration and setbacks than there's going to be success and happiness with the architect exam. And that's the reality of it. But you can 100% accomplish this goal if you understand those are the rules of the game. And finally, the bootcamp doesn't just end after 10 weeks. The support and the connections, the structure, the process is still there to help guide you all the way through to the finish line. I hope this breakdown was helpful, and if you're currently a boot camper, use this as a reminder to stay focused, trust the process, and just keep pushing forward. We're here to support you every single step of the way. All right, team, let's get back to work.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.